For 6 centuries, one empire did the impossible. They fought war after war against kings, sultans, crusaders, and rising European powers. They conquered nations, lost nations, and rebuilt borders from the Balkans to the Arabian Desert. But here is the statistical anomaly that historians rarely explain. They didn't go bankrupt. Most empires collapse because they run out of money. The British Empire went broke after 2 world wars. The Soviet Union collapsed because it couldn't afford the Cold War. But the Ottoman Empire kept an army marching for 600 years. How? Because they didn't just fight war. They engineered a financial machine where war paid for itself. Western audiences usually see the Ottomans as a vague collection of turbans and domes, a cinematic villain for European knights. But if you look at the ledgers, you see something terrifyingly modern. They were the first state to treat conquest not as a military glory, but as a business model. From the moment Osman I led his frontier tribe into Anatolia in 1299, they operated on a simple principle. Warfare is an income stream. Every time they took a city, they didn't just loot it and leave. They integrated it into a revenue engine. By the time they crossed into Europe in the 1350s, they weren't just a tribe. They were a corporation controlling the trade routes between 2 continents. But a strong revenue base doesn't explain longevity. You can have all the gold in the world, and a bad army will still drain it in a decade. The Ottomans survived because they solved the one problem that destroys every superpower: payroll. They figured out a way to field the largest army in the world without paying them a salary from the central treasury. It was a piece of financial engineering so brilliant that it allowed them to fight wars on 3 continents simultaneously, while European kings were pawning their crown jewels just to hire mercenaries. In this video, I'm going to show you the cheat codes the Ottomans used to hack the economy of war. We will look at the tax systems, the human levies, and the trade monopolies that funded the longest-running military machine in history. And finally, we will see exactly what happened when they stopped innovating and started borrowing. A lesson that looks terrifyingly similar to the US economy today. To understand how the Ottomans avoided bankruptcy, you have to look at their biggest expense, the army. In 1400, if a European king wanted to raise an army, he had to find gold up front to pay knights or expensive mercenaries. If the gold ran out, the army went home, or worse, turned on the king. The Ottomans realized that payroll was the enemy of longevity. So they invented a system to eliminate it almost entirely. They called it the Timar system. Instead of paying a cavalry soldier, a sepahi, a cash salary from the central treasury in Istanbul, the Sultan gave him the tax rights to a piece of conquered land, usually a few villages or farms. The soldier didn't own the land, but he owned the income it generated. In exchange for this income, he was required by law to equip himself, buy his own horse, maintain his own armor, and show up for war whenever the Sultan called, bringing a specific number of armed retainers with him. Think about the genius of this financial engineering. The state outsourced the cost of military readiness to the land itself. The central government didn't have to collect taxes from a distant province, ship the gold to the capital, count it, and then pay it back out to soldiers. The money stayed local. The soldier became a kind of regional manager, incentivized to keep his territory stable and productive because his income depended on it. This was the engine of Ottoman expansion. When they conquered a new territory, say in the Balkans, they didn't have to spend money to garrison it. They simply divided the land into Timars, granted them to their soldiers, and the province instantly became self-policing and self-funding. The army paid for itself. This system is a masterclass in incentive structures. It explains how they could field armies of 50,000 or 100,000 men without crashing the economy. We are building a community here that looks at history through the lens of money, not just battles. We are racing to hit 1,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2025. If we hit that goal, I am going to release the killer video. This is a script that exposes the financial mechanisms that modern empires use to hide their debt. Mechanisms that make the Timar system look simple. I am afraid to upload it, but if we have 1,000 insiders, I will take the risk. So hit that subscribe button. Now, let's look at the other half of the army, the elite infantry, and the far darker method used to pay for them. While the Timar system solved the problem of the cavalry, the Ottomans still needed an elite, professional infantry to storm castles and hold the line. In the Middle Ages, elite infantry were usually mercenaries. They were expensive, they demanded gold up front, and if you ran out of cash, they switched sides. The Ottomans realized that renting loyalty was a bad business model. They decided they needed to own it. This led to the creation of the Janissaries, and the financing method behind them was one of the most ruthless examples of state planning in history. They didn't recruit soldiers, they taxed them. This was the devshirme, or the collection. Every few years, Ottoman officials would travel to the Christian villages of the Balkans. Instead of asking for gold or grain, they demanded a specific quota of young boys. These children were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and entered into a rigorous, state-run training program that lasted for years. The smartest became administrators who ran the empire. The strongest became the Janissaries who fought for it. Let's be brutally honest about what this was. It was state-sponsored kidnapping on an industrial scale. But from a financial perspective, it solved the mercenary problem. The state acquired elite human capital at a young age for the cost of food and training. Because these soldiers were cut off from their families and forbidden initially from marrying or owning businesses, they had no rival loyalties. They didn't fight for a tribe, a region, or a paycheck. They fought for the state because the state was their only family. They were the ultimate company men. This gave the Ottomans a terrifying advantage. While European kings were bankrupting themselves, trying to bribe noblemen to show up for battle, the Sultan had a standing army of highly disciplined shock troops that operated on a fixed cost. It was a slave soldier model that turned the conquered populations into the engine of further conquest. The Janissaries were the tip of the spear that allowed the empire to expand. But an army, no matter how loyal, still needs to eat. It needs steel for swords and gunpowder for cannons. To pay for the raw materials of war, the Ottomans needed liquid cash. And to get that, they decided to seize the most valuable real estate on planet Earth. You can have the best army in the world, but if you don't have revenue, you eventually starve. The genius of the Ottoman strategy was geography. They didn't just conquer random land, they conquered the choke points. By taking Constantinople, Istanbul, in 1453, and later expanding into Egypt and the Red Sea, they effectively seized the toll booth of the world economy. In the 1500s, if you were a Venetian merchant wanting silk from China, or a French trader wanting spices from India, you had to pass through Ottoman territory. There was no Suez Canal. There was no route around Africa, yet. The Silk Road and the spice routes were the arteries of global wealth, and the Sultan had his hand on the jugular. Every caravan that crossed the desert, every ship that docked in Alexandria, and every bolt of silk that crossed the Bosporus was taxed. It was the ultimate monopoly. The Ottomans didn't have to produce the silk or grow the spices. They just had to charge rent on the road. This income stream was massive. It allowed them to pay for the gunpowder, the cannons, and the fleets that kept the empire expanding. While European nations were taxing their own poor peasants to fund wars, the Ottomans were taxing international trade. They were extracting wealth from the very enemies they were fighting. It was a brilliant system of vendor financing, making Europe pay for the armies that threatened Europe. But they didn't just rely on trade. They also locked down the most profitable commodities within their own borders. Beyond the toll booths, the Ottomans perfected the art of the state monopoly. They understood that while trade can fluctuate, human needs are constant. People always need salt to preserve food. They always need soap to wash. And by the 1600s, the entire empire was addicted to a new drug called coffee. The Sultan didn't leave these industries to the free market. He controlled them. The state granted exclusive licenses to produce or sell these commodities, taking a massive cut of the profit. This provided a steady, reliable baseline of cash that wasn't dependent on winning a battle next week. It is eerily similar to how modern states operate. What salt was to the Ottomans, oil is to Saudi Arabia, or natural gas is to Russia. It is a strategic national industry that funds the military. But the Ottomans had another revenue stream that most empires dream of: tribute. They had conquered so many neighboring states, from Wallachia, Romania, to the Crimean Khanate, that it was often cheaper to let them rule themselves in exchange for a massive annual payment. These vassal states paid protection money to the Sultan. It was pure profit. No administration costs, no garrisons, just a check in the mail every year. This combination, low military costs via the Timar system, high revenue via trade tolls, and steady income via monopolies, allowed the empire to operate with a balanced budget for centuries. They lived within their means. They didn't have a national debt because they didn't need one. But this is where the lesson turns dark. Because eventually, the world changed, and the Ottomans failed to change with it. And that leads to the ultimate question about power. I want to know what you think. When you look at history, what kills empires faster? Losing battles on the field, or losing credit with the banks? Go to the comments and type battles or credit. I suspect the answer is obvious to anyone watching the US debt clock today. Because when the Ottomans finally started borrowing, the end came faster than anyone expected. The Ottoman system was a masterpiece of medieval economics. It worked perfectly, until the world changed and the empire failed to change with it. By the 1700s, two catastrophes hit simultaneously. First, the Europeans figured out how to bypass the toll booth. The Portuguese and Spanish discovered routes around Africa and across the Atlantic. Suddenly, the Silk Road wasn't the only game in town. The cash flow from trade tolls dried up. Second, the Janissaries, the loyal slave soldiers, became corrupt. They realized they were the only power in the capital, so they started demanding higher pay, refusing to fight, and overthrowing sultans who tried to reform them. They became a mafia that drained the treasury instead of filling it. Desperate to modernize their army to keep up with a rising Europe, the Ottomans needed liquid cash, fast. The old land-for-service Timar system didn't work for modern guns and artillery. They needed gold. So, in the 1850s, they made the fatal mistake that kills every empire. They started borrowing money from their enemies. They took massive loans from British and French banks to fund the Crimean War and build palaces like Dolmabahce. At first, it felt like free money. But compound interest is a math problem you cannot negotiate with. By the 1870s, the empire was spending more than half of its entire tax revenue just to pay the interest on the debt. They had entered the debt spiral. In 1881, the unthinkable happened. The Ottoman government effectively declared bankruptcy. The European powers, the very nations the Ottomans used to tax, marched into Istanbul, not with soldiers, but with accountants. They set up the Public Debt Administration. This was a council of European bankers who took direct control of the Ottoman economy. They seized the tax revenue from silk, salt, and tobacco and sent it straight to Paris and London to pay the bondholders. The Sultan was still on the throne, but the bankers owned the kingdom. I bet you know someone who says national debt doesn't matter, or we owe it to ourselves. Do them a favor. Share this specific timestamp with them right now. They need to see that debt isn't just numbers on a screen. It is a mechanism of conquest. The moment you lose control of your balance sheet, you lose your sovereignty. The Ottoman Empire didn't fall in 1922. It was repossessed in 1881. The final collapse was just the paperwork. And this brings us to the terrifying parallel with the modern world. Because if you look at the US economy today, we aren't just following the Ottoman playbook, we are speedrunning it. If you think the Ottoman system sounds like ancient history, you aren't looking closely enough at the modern world. The uniforms have changed, but the financial mechanisms are identical. The old Timar system, where soldiers were paid via land rights instead of cash, is the ancestor of the modern military-industrial complex. Today, the US government outsources logistics to private contractors like Halliburton and Lockheed Martin. We don't pay them with land, but we pay them with guaranteed government contracts that function exactly like tax farms. It is the same attempt to keep a massive military machine running by privatizing the profit. The state monopolies on salt and copper live on as national oil companies and sovereign wealth funds. Saudi Aramco plays the exact same role today that the Ottoman salt monopoly played in 1600, a strategic piggy bank that funds the regime. And the Janissaries? They are the entrenched bureaucracies and special interest groups that become so powerful they can hold the government hostage for budget increases, draining the treasury they were supposed to protect. But the most terrifying parallel is the debt spiral. Just like the Ottomans in 1850, the United States is currently borrowing money to pay for the interest on money it already borrowed. We are living in the late empire phase, where the cost of maintaining the superpower exceeds the revenue it generates. The Ottomans lasted 600 years because they were financially disciplined for the first 400. They collapsed only when they lost that discipline. The US is following the same trajectory, but at digital speed. This brings us back to our mission. We are tracking these historical echoes because they predict our future. And we have a goal. We are racing to hit 1,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2025. If we hit that number, I am going to release the killer video. This is the script I have already written that exposes the specific financial instruments the modern elites use to profit from this debt spiral. I am genuinely afraid to upload it because it attacks the banking system directly. But if we hit 1,000 insiders, I will take the risk. Before I let you go, I want to say something directly to you. Just you and me. I know that comparing the US to a collapsed empire can feel pessimistic. It can feel like I'm saying the end is nigh. But that's not the point. The point is that systems have life cycles. Trees grow, they hit a ceiling, and they fall. Economies are the same. The Ottomans didn't vanish, they just changed form. The people survived. The culture survived. The tragedy of the Ottoman collapse wasn't that the empire ended, it was that the regular people were the ones left holding the bag for the Sultan's debt. The bankers in London got paid. The Sultan got to live in a palace. The peasant got inflation and poverty. I don't want you to be the peasant. I want you to be the historian who sees this cycle turning. You are watching this channel because you know that business as usual is over. You know that the rules of money are changing. And you are right. By understanding how the Ottomans financed their war machine, you can understand how the modern world finances its own. And once you understand the game, you stop being a pawn. So, if you are with me, if you want to learn the lessons that the history books leave out, hit that subscribe button. Let's make sure we are on the right side of the ledger when the debt collectors come. Class dismissed.